A minute ago, a bachelor, now you're married. You don't waste any time.
I do have one question, though. How long were Angie and you cheating before you decided to get rid of me?
Ashley Judd had us in a chokehold with all the thrillers she was in the late 90s. Out of all her movies, this is my fave. She acted down in this one. This is another sleeping with the enemy type thriller, but this time the wife is determined to get a lick back without fear of having to answer for it. After all these years, this movie has aged so well and is still entertaining as hell. With that being said, I noticed some things while watching this movie, and you know I have my thoughts. But before we get to that, it's time to recap. So let's get into it. As the movie starts, we are introduced to our main character, Libby, and her son, Maddie. We are also introduced to Libby's husband, Nick, and his co-worker and Libby's friend, Angie, at a fundraiser for a local school. Nick is an art lover. Keep this in mind moving forward. He helps auction off some art pieces to raise money for the school. Nick has a charming and charismatic personality, which amuses Libby. She won't feel the same way about it towards the end of the movie, though. After the fundraiser, Angie helps Nick surprise Libby with a weekend sailboat trip. Angie offers to watch Maddie while they get away and spend some quality time. While this romantic weekend starts out amazing, it soon takes a turn for the worse when Libby wakes up to blood everywhere. On the bed, on her clothes, all over the boat, everywhere. She calls for Nick, but he doesn't respond and he's nowhere to be found. While she searches for Nick, she notices a random knife on the deck of the boat and she does what they always do. She picks it up right on time for the Coast Guard to see her with it. Hours later, Libby's back home and the search for Nick doesn't go well. They still haven't found him. Libby urges the sheriff to keep looking, but the sheriff tells her that the chances of finding Nick are not good. Of course, Libby doesn't take this news well. Sometime later, the sheriff comes by to visit, along with a family friend and lawyer, Bobby. Bobby tells her that Nick has officially been declared dead and, surprise, they are charging her with his murder. Now, Libby is in disbelief at this. She's still thinking this is a mistake and it will get cleared up eventually, but she's about to find out how wrong she is. After she gets arrested and placed in jail, Bobby comes by to let her know that her bail has been denied. Libby tells Bobby what she thinks happened that night on the boat. She tells him that she thought Nick could have possibly cut himself while fishing and that he probably came to wake her up, and that would explain the blood being everywhere. Bobby tells her that he looked up her life insurance info and noticed that it was recently updated to a $2 million policy. Libby insists, again, that she did not kill her husband and asks Bobby if he believes her.
Do you think I killed him?
It's the first rule of being a lawyer. What we think doesn't matter.
We fast forward to her trial. She hears Nick's 911 call for the first time. Nick claimed he had been stabbed, and when questioned about the call, Libby insisted that someone must have come aboard the sailboat. The prosecutor doesn't believe her, and that same doubt spreads across the courtroom. Libby insists again that she did not kill Nick.
Bobby, I did not kill my husband.
Things are not looking good for Libby, and she knows it. She asks Angie to care for Maddie while she's locked up. She tells her about the $2 million life policy and gives her permission to use that to take care of Maddie. While Angie is initially unsure about this, she eventually agrees to take custody of Maddie. Libby gets sentenced and placed in jail. She meets two of her cellmates, Evelyn and Margaret. Initially, Angie brings Maddie to visit Libby often, but eventually those visits stop and Angie stops accepting her phone calls. Libby is upset by this, and Evelyn and Margaret notice. Margaret tells her to stop feeling sorry for herself and use her brain to track Angie and Maddie down. Libby does just that and calls the school Angie used to work for, pretending to be Angie, and asks to confirm the address where her last paycheck was sent to. With that info, she's able to get a current phone number for Angie, and when she calls, Angie is shocked to hear her voice.
Hello? Angie? Angie. Libby, I was just about to call you. Oh, bull.
Angie now lives in San Francisco with Maddie and someone else. As Libby is speaking to Maddie, that someone else walks in and gives Libby the surprise of her life.
Daddy!
Nick?
Child, now Libby realized that this was a scheme that Nick and Angie set up to come to her with the bullshit, and this is where it starts to get good, so pay attention. Okay, so boom. Libby immediately reached out to the insurance company to report fraud, but they didn't want to listen to her. After this, Libby is distraught and feels like no one will ever believe her, but then Margaret comes through with some legal tea. She tells Libby about a legal term called double jeopardy that states no one can get convicted of the same offense twice. Basically, she can kill Nick in the middle of Times Square and nobody can do anything about it because technically she's already killed him and served time for it. After learning this, Libby is on a mission. She starts working out with a purpose. She's running off of pure anger, determination, and hatred at this point. Margaret comes through again to prepare Libby for her parole hearing. She tells her to show remorse for killing Nick and to express that she's looking to turn her life around, things that Libby wouldn't think to say on her own. Honestly, Margaret was the real MVP in this movie. I'll discuss this more in the final thoughts. Libby follows Margaret's advice and she's released from prison. She's sent to a halfway house where she meets her parole officer, Travis. Libby will be on conditional parole for 3 years. Travis tells her the rules to abide by, and he notices a picture of her son and immediately feels that Libby is going to be in trouble.
You want to tell me about him?
No.
I'm going to have trouble with you, Parsons.
Libby spends her time going to the library to try to find out how to locate Angie. This random guy volunteers to help her, but finds it hard to do so without flirting. But Libby knew just what to say to get rid of him.
Maybe when this thing is finished at searching, we could go to this neat little bar now and have a little drink.
Yeah, I just have to check in with my parole officer first.
He thought she was playing with him. Child, you wish.
What did you do, not pay your parking tickets?
Oh, no. I was convicted of murdering my husband.
Oh, look, I just remembered I have this appointment with
See ya.
Before she ran him off, he helped her locate Angie's possible addresses by searching for her teacher's certificate. Unfortunately, the list was too long to sift through. Later on, after Libby makes it home, she sees Travis scolding another parolee for coming home late and not being where she was supposed to be. It's here where the other parolees gossip and we learn that Travis used to be a lawyer. He was drinking and driving one night while his wife and daughter were in the car and got into a car accident. He hasn't been allowed to see his daughter ever since. This is kind of important to the story. Travis and Libby have a similar experience of losing access to their children. Libby disregards Travis's rules and sets out on a mission to go to the last school where Angie worked. She tries to speak to the school's director. Mind you, the school director, Angie, and Nick all work together. So this chick gets a major side eye from me. Tell me why she tells Libby to not try and find Maddie and it will be better for her to let him go since so much has happened and so much time has passed. Child, Libby is not trying to hear any of that. Libby goes back to the school after dark to try and get more information on Angie. Same time, Travis is just now noticing that Libby is MIA. Some officers arrive shortly after to check out the school while Libby is still inside, searching around. She's able to find Angie's file just in time. I don't know why she just didn't grab the whole thing, but she grabs a piece of paper from the file that had Angie's social on it and hops out the window just as the officers spot her. She runs out and they chase her. Somehow she's able to get them to crash their whip, but isn't fast enough to get away after that and they catch her. Baby, what kind of training were you doing? You had the space and opportunity to get Ghost and you still got caught. Anyway, Travis picks her up from jail.
Did you have a nice day at the beach?
Travis reminds her that all she had to do was wait 3 years, but now she's even further away from seeing her son. Libby insists that she's innocent, but Travis doesn't want to hear it. Before Travis exits the car, Libby asks about the picture of his daughter on his dash. He cuts their convo short after that, and he handcuffs her to the car, but leaves the keys in the ignition. This man was not thinking clearly at all. Shortly after Travis leaves, Libby turns the car on and uses it to try and take the cuffs off. Meanwhile, Travis is up top enjoying his little coffee until he notices a random car sinking into the water and looks down to find Libby trying to escape. He barely makes it down to the car before Libby drives the car off the boat. They struggle for a bit in the water, but Libby eventually gets away with Travis's gun. Later, Travis is questioned at the hospital by his boss. He doesn't reveal to him that he knows where she's headed, but he's starting to realize that Libby is running on pure passion at this point. Libby makes it to her mother's home. Her mother gives her a wad of cash and a truck and sends her on her way. Libby goes to a car dealership, and it isn't to upgrade the whip. No, but to finesse this unsuspecting salesman out of information, specifically Angela's address, by giving him Angela's social and him confirming Angela's home address. Meanwhile, Travis uses a former parolee as a resource. By force, of course.
Speaking of giving out personal information, does your employer know you used to perform the art of fellatio for a living? You went to prison for it, and now you're out on parole. You're required by law to tell it.
Same time, Libby drives to Angela's current address, or what she thought was her current address. The new residents of the home send her over to a neighbor who had been there for 40 years, but when she talks to her, she finds out that Angela has gone home to glory by way of a freak accident with a stove. But ironically, Nick, or Simon, Nick's new alias, and Maddie survive and leave soon after. How convenient. While Libby looks at old newspaper clippings about Angie and the accident, she spots an art piece in the background of one of the pictures and decides to check out a local art dealer to hunt down the buyer of that particular piece. As she's doing that, Travis is still searching for her. He finds her truck parked outside the gallery and parks his car behind hers and goes in to try and find her. Inside, Libby talks with the owner of the gallery, who helps her track down the buyer of the art piece in the photo. The current owner, Jonathan Devereaux, is most likely Simon, aka Nick, her dead but really alive husband. As soon as she gets his address, she has to make a run for it because Travis is on her tail. And did his car being behind her stop her or force her to hesitate and think twice? No, child, she ran that little car over and continued on to her destination. Libby catches a flight to New Orleans, and she's able to locate Jonathan's address rather quickly. She walked in and asked for Jonathan, but the receptionist told her that he was not in, but would be there later for the auction. As she scopes the scene at the hotel, she overhears one of the guests mentioning their room number and name, and she uses this information to buy a dress for the auction from a nearby boutique, even sharing some dark humor with the boutique owner.
Fabulous. I haven't felt this good since the day my husband died.
Meanwhile, Travis has landed in New Orleans and has engaged the NOPD to help him track down Libby. Libby, the new queen of finesse, gets into this auction by schmoozing with one of the guests. Shortly after she arrives, the auction begins and Jonathan, aka Simon, aka Nick, shows his face. He still has that charismatic personality, but this time Libby is annoyed rather than amused. The bidding process begins and Libby takes part. There's a back and forth with this lady, but eventually Libby wins and it was time for her to claim her prize.
Hello, Nick.
He was shocked AF, and Libby didn't waste any time getting to the point and asking about Maddie. When this lady from earlier tried to introduce herself, Libby let it all out the bag.
A minute ago a bachelor, now you're married. You don't waste any time.
I do have one question, though. How long were Angie and you cheating before you decided to get rid of me?
Jonathan, aka Simon, aka Nick, tried to play in Libby's face by telling her that he'd arrange a meeting with Maddie the next day, but Libby doesn't trust his word. Rightfully so. Eventually, she gives him the terms that he has no choice but to agree to if he wants to keep his charade of a life going. Basically, Libby wants her son. and after she gets him, Nick will be free to live his life as he pleases. She was being really lenient, okay? Same time, Travis arrives at the party just as Libby sneaks out. He asks for Jonathan and speaks with him shortly after. Jonathan plays the part, says that for some odd reason, Libby thinks he's her dead husband. I believe this is when Travis started to feel that something wasn't right. Later, Libby sits in a restaurant to get a bite to eat. The bartender recognizes her from the wanted posters that were posted at the bar. He doesn't rat her out. Instead, he gives her a heads up by telling her to leave since cops were searching for her in the same restaurant. As she walks out, she realizes that the city is on high alert for her. She uses the umbrella given to her by the bartender as a shield to block her face from the cops in the area. She gets spotted by this cop though, and he calls in her current location. Of course, Travis wasn't far away and he spotted her, or at least he spotted who he thought was her. Libby ducked off into this boutique just in time to hide from him. The next day, Travis goes to visit Jonathan and asks him questions. He asked about Libby, and he also asked about the artwork behind him, the same artwork that Libby hunted down earlier at the gallery. This is when Travis officially knew that something was off about Jonathan. Libby meets with Jonathan soon after at their agreed-upon place, the cemetery, of all places. Jonathan agreed to bring Maddie, and mind you, it's been 6 years since she's seen Maddie, so she doesn't really know what he looks like at this point, but Jonathan points to Maddie, who is down a bit further in the cemetery. As she walks towards him, he runs away. Now, Libby thinks that Maddie is maybe mad at her and doesn't want to see her, so she starts to follow him to get him to talk to her. Whole time, this was another setup, and Jonathan, aka Simon, aka Nick, knocks her out and puts her in a casket. And Maddie wasn't really Maddie. It was a kid he paid to lure her into the cemetery. Travis goes to visit Jonathan the next day. He came to see if he heard from her and asked about pictures that he brought for him to look at. Travis starts to put the pieces together around this time. Travis is slowly realizing that Libby did not kill her husband and that Jonathan is really Nick, though he can't prove it quite yet. Sometime later, Libby finally wakes up and realizes she's in this casket. She starts freaking out, but she eventually escapes by shooting the hinges off the casket and breaking the window to get out. As Libby makes it back to the hotel where Jonathan is, she's scooped up by Travis. Travis has found proof that Jonathan is Nick and now knows for sure that Libby didn't kill him. So the next day, Travis goes to see Jonathan, aka Simon, aka Nick. He shows Nick's ID and mentions that he couldn't find the right one at first, but after doing some digging, he found it. Nick has been pulling his identity scheme before Libby. It's just been an endless cycle up until this point. Travis tells Nick that he's going to report him, but Nick bribes Travis with money. Now, Travis pretends to go along with it, and he mentions that Libby could be a problem for them both. Nick confesses that Libby's been buried and that she shouldn't be a problem. 2 seconds later, Libby enters the room, alive and well. She asks about Maddie, and Nick admits he's in Georgia, but Libby doesn't believe him.
Where's my son?
In St. Albans School in Georgia, all right?
Travis tells Nick that he will go to jail for murdering Libby, but honestly, let's not, because all that would do is start an endless cycle of tit for tat, and we don't have time. But Travis and Libby are satisfied with themselves and begin to leave, but surprise, Nick's got a gun, and he shoots Travis. As he corners Libby, Travis wrestles the gun away from him, and Libby picks it up and shoots him, killing him for real this time. Sometime after, Libby makes it to Maddie's school in Georgia. After all these years, the time has finally come to see him, but now she's nervous. Travis snaps her out of it though.
What if he doesn't recognize me?
Damn, woman, because of you, I have lost a perfectly good used car and a not-so-good job. If you don't go to this kid right now, I'm going to have you arrested.
Libby watches as the kids play, but during halftime, she's able to recognize Maddie and she calls his name. Maddie slowly starts to recognize her.
Do you know who I am?
They hug each other and catch up, and this is the end of the movie. And here are my final thoughts. I guess divorce wasn't an option. Child, Nick sent Libby to prison and he straight up murdered Angie. I don't even want to think about what he did to the women before them. And something crossed my mind that I didn't think about before. I really think Bobby, Rebecca, and their damn sheriff helped Nick with this scam. It's the only thing that makes sense to me. It took them 2 minutes to declare him dead, and they put her in jail just as quick. Her own lawyer claimed he knew she was innocent, but said what he thought didn't matter. And then Rebecca didn't even want her reaching out to her son after she was released. You can't tell me that he didn't pay off all of those people with the life insurance policy. And did Angela think that Nick was going to be better to her after watching him frame her best friend for his murder? She deserved that karma because really? Girl. Libby was not letting up when it came to Nick though, and I don't blame her. Like I said before, she was running off of pure hatred and determination. Her finesse skills increased during the film, and it was entertaining to see how she handled different situations. I think this side of her really didn't emerge until Margaret brought it out of her. Libby accepted defeat at first, but Margaret encouraged her to fight instead. I sincerely hope that Libby puts money on Margaret's books and pays her lawyer fees for life, because the way that woman came through for her, and she didn't even have to, changed Libby's entire life out of the goodness of her heart. Child, she wouldn't have to worry about a damn thing after that. I'm glad that Libby listened to Margaret and fought for her son. If she had waited those 3 years, there's no telling where Maddie would be. Jonathan was in New Orleans, and his son was all the way in Georgia, so clearly he didn't care to be in his life at all, and it probably would have been harder to reconnect after so long. This movie is free to watch on YouTube. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend that you do. It's a really good film. I'll leave the link in the description box. Anyway, that's it for this movie. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. As for the next recap, all I'm going to say is 1995. And it's another film about a high school teacher trying to save their students. This movie had a bomb soundtrack too that featured a hip-hop remake of a Stevie Wonder classic. See you next time, you guys. Bye.